They found the mask in a box of costumes labeled Holiday Party. Misk. It had been shoved between Santa hats and a string of cracked lights, wrapped in yellowing newspaper that smelled faintly of salt and damp wood. The paint on the clown's smile was flaking, a bright, cheap red that had bled into the white in tiny spider veins. Someone had glued a cracked rhinestone where the nose should have been. Rosa held it for a moment and felt the plastic chill through her gloves. Who even donates this? Fuck. Maya laughed, and the sound ricocheted down the gym like a paper airplane. She was new to volunteering. An eager part-time student who filmed everything for her podcast and thought oddities were good content. Tom hand carried a box of donated drills from his crew and set them on a folding table, joking about how even his workmen had better costumes than he did. Officer Cole waved from the doorway with the thermos he always brought when the nights ran long. The room smelled of coffee and pine-scented cleaner. Strings of yellow bulbs hung across the rafters like a cheer that had been nailed in place. The tables were piled with coats, canned food, stuffed bears. Mostly the night was small and human and warm, the kind of community thing that made people feel like they belonged to something when winter made everything else brittle. Maya slipped the mask on like a dare. "Hold my phone," she told Rosa, and the others gathered in a loose half-circle, having a little theater that made them forget for a minute the tuition bills and the busted heater in Rosa's apartment. Maya's eyes went bright through the plastic eye holes. She stuck out her tongue and did a ridiculous little bow, and they laughed. Her hands were still when she lifted them to pull the mask off. She didn't laugh after that. "I drove his truck into the river," she said, and the words came out rushed and small like something she'd been holding too long. The room went quiet in the way a room goes quiet when a balloon is about to pop. Officer Cole's thermos hit the table with a soft clatter. "What?" Tom said. He was grinning, then not. "What did you—" Maya's face had gone slack under the plastic. Tears cut tracks down her cheeks, and she didn't notice. "I pushed him," she said. "I pushed him into the water and I left." I thought she stopped, eyes focusing on something that wasn't the folding chairs or the cotton snow piled in one corner. I thought he'd surface. Rosa set the phone down with more care than she meant to show. "You sure you're okay?" she asked, and the question sounded thin, a life raft tossed over a much wider water. "No," Maya whispered. "I'm not. I never." Her hands flew to her face as if trying to catch the memory in the air. "I don't remember being there, but I can see it. I can hear it." A few minutes later, someone half-laughed to break the tension, then asked for the mask. It became a dare, a dark, stupid chain. A bored teenager who volunteered only because his mother made him try it on and confessed to stealing a radio from a house when he was 14. An elderly woman who admitted she'd lied on mortgage paperwork to get a loan. Each memory came like an impossible film projected into the wearer's head. Tactile, precise, impossible for the person to claim ownership of. After each removal, the wearer trembled as if they had run from a long way. Tom watched most of it without touching. He'd come because the charity was something he'd built into his weekly scheduled donations. Checklists, a kind of civic muscle that kept him from thinking about the things he did not say at his kitchen table. He joked with Officer Cole about lights and heaters and kids. When the mask landed in his hands, it felt smaller than it looked. It smiled too eager for such old plastic. "Come on," Rosa said softly. "Prove it's nothing," Tom laughed, the sound brittle. "All right, let's make this quick." He pressed it to his face, the strap whispering. For a beat, he was Tom again, the contractor, the father, the man who fixed leak sand. Then a shadow slid across his features. When he took it off, his eyes were not the same. He looked like a man who had seen a photograph of himself he didn't remember taking. He sucked in his breath and said very quietly, "Mason's Pier. Tuesday night, 2 a.m. He fell off the side." She screamed his name, Lissa. The room folded inward on itself. Eliza. The name was like a key in a door they hadn't known was locked. Rosa's throat closed. That was the missing girl they had all seen posters for last summer, the one who had vanished after a party by the docks. Officer Cole let the thermos drop to the floor, and it rolled toward the curtains, ticking its little lid like a small, offended clock. "Tom, what?" Rosa started. The word came out thin. Someone had to check it. Tom's mouth moved again, as though something else were feeding him words. She wasn't supposed to die. A Polaroid fell out from beneath the array of stuffed animals, as if it had been pushed up by a ghostly hand. Rosa's fingers trembled as she picked it up. The photo was old and grainy. Men in cheap clown makeup, laughing in a circle at a pier, their faces bright as gore. Someone had circled one face with a red pen. Underneath, in a handwriting that looked like it had been pressed quickly, someone had scrawled Elisa. 8/12. The date on the back matched the day the town had marked her missing. On Maya's phone, the recording was still running. When Rosa hit play, the video was grainy and the audio low. But under the background chatter, a thin, high laugh threaded through, like a child's giggle played through a long tube. It overlapped Tom's voice. She wasn't supposed to die. Then, before anyone could say anything else, the lights in the gym hiccuped. They blinked once. Someone's phone buzzed. The bulbs popped with a thin electrical snap and went out. For a breath, the room was only the small, shocked sounds of people finding their hands and bodies in the dark. Then, just as the emergency lights snapped on and threw everyone in a cold blue, something under the laugh, soft, close, and unmistakably a child's chuckle, rippled across Maya's recording. It sounded far away, like canned applause in a closed room. And for one hot second, Rosa thought she could feel that Polaroid in her fist burn like an accusation. Detective Harmon arrived with the kind of calm that belonged to people who had learned how to make chaos legible. He moved through the gym like someone taking inventory, one set of fingerprints, one witness at a time. Officer Cole stayed close to him, the weight of community policing pinned to his shoulders like a second winter coat. The Polaroid sat on the table face up, the circle of red ink still bright against the faded faces. Harmon did not smile, did not need to. "We need names," he said. "Tell me everything you've seen, everything you remember. Now." Tom's hands shook when he spoke. He gave Harmon the time and location he'd said in the gym. Mason S. Pier, 2 a.m. last summer. Harmon's pen did not hesitate. He radioed it in, and within hours there were people standing where the water met rotten wood, flashlights carving into the dark, forensics in white booties moving like quiet insects. The pier was low and slimy, the air sharp with salt. Under a lamp, Harmon's team found what Tom had described: a smear of dark on the railing, shoe print and sludge, the twisted corner of what could have been a jacket snagged on a rusty nail. They dug where the mud looked like it had been recently disrupted and found a shallow bundle wrapped in fabric. It took minutes to become more than fabric. A body, name tags, a bracelet with a child's blue bead. Elisa's mother collapsed when they carried the bundle into light. The town that had learned to whisper about missing persons now had to say a name aloud and watch a woman's shoulders fold. Back at the gym, the mask sat on a paper towel beside a row of evidence bags. Harmon was practical, put gloves on, and photographed it, cataloged it. He had seen strange things in his career, people who lied without blinking, bodies that pointed into dark truths, but he could not deny the way the mask seemed to hold its grin even in the sterile white of his office. He did what he could, get the facts, log the chain, make the case. Still, the mask had done something that made law feel inadequate. Confessions had not been hearsay. They had produced places and things the police could find. Derek Harris, the kid who admitted to stealing a radio, led the team to an abandoned storage unit where boxes of sold goods were stacked like secrets. Inside were receipts and a ledger with names and amounts written in a cramped hand, money paid, tools moved, dates circled. The ledger matched the Polaroids in Marta S. drawer in a way that did not allow for coincidence. Her role as volunteer coordinator had been a clean, mechanical thing until the mask made it a ledger of personal debts. She had hidden papers once, years ago, an unsigned letter. A name removed from a list because protecting a brother felt like protecting a family. Now Harmon's eyes found her, and those old missteps looked like evidence. The mask, Harmon said quietly to her, was not new. It was made by a company that supplied traveling troops, but the paper wrapping had an old stamp review circus, closed in 1952 after scandal. Rosa spoke to a local librarian who remembered the circus as a rumor more than an event. Performers who entertained wealthy patrons and kept favors and ledgers. A house clown nicknamed Boniface, who had an appetite for collecting secrets. When Boniface disappeared, someone said he had run away with the money. Other people said things worse. Rosa pulled a memory to the surface she had kept polished and small. When she ran the charity, she had once filed donations under alternate names to protect a man, her brother, from scrutiny. He had been late on payments and trouble, and she traded paperwork for silence. The mask produced a memory not hers, but that fit like a glove. A man in a satin jacket laughing, a ledger open to a page with a name she knew too well. Her guilt tasted like old pennies. Harmon did his work with an even hand. Some of the town's respectable men were led, stunned and mute, 2 items they could not explain. One conspirator, who had made a small fortune fencing goods, tore at his shirt and begged for a lawyer. Another, confronted by the ledger and a photo, crumbled into a confession that brought more bodies to light. Not all the guilty confessed easily. One man climbed into his truck at dawn and drove into the fog until his car could not be found. The search turned up his abandoned boots at the edge of a marsh. No one saw what took him. Maybe he panicked. Maybe something else ran him down. The marsh kept its own counsel. In the days after, the town tried to reassemble its ordinary shape. People slipped in and out of the grocery with their heads down, buying milk and pretending normality was a garment you could put on again. Rosa returned to the gym in the afternoons to box donations, labeling coats and folding sweaters. Each item felt heavier with the thought of the ledger. With the idea that once you could see what you had done, the world would not let you forget. Maya posted the footage online with the consent of those in it. The recording of Tom going blank and whispering a place brought 1,000 mean-spirited comments, 1,000 prayers, and a handful of new tips. People called in memories, little things that matched ledger entries. The mask's reach extended into rumor and evidence in equal measure. In every hand that had worn it, the memories had matched the world. They locked the mask in evidence, zipped into a clear bag, and catalogued. Harmon signed the receipts and placed it in a crate. He told Rosa they would hold it, analyze it. "Paper trail," he said. "We do what we can." 2 weeks later, a box from the county archives arrived at the station. In it, a brittle playbill slipped from between archival papers. Riverview Circus, 1949. The program list named Boniface the Clown, and an attendant marked Keeper of Ledger. On the back of the program, someone had written in a hand that leaned to the left, "Keep a list, keep them laughing." Rosa studied the note in her kitchen and thought of all the small lies she defolded into neat squares. She felt both relieved that the facts were surfacing and terrified that truth had teeth. The town would not be the same. Some people would go to prison. Some would never be forgiven. But there was still the small, impossible thing. The mask had been an instrument of memory. It had not killed. It had not smashed lives with supernatural force. It returned what was kept. On a cold morning, when the winter sun made the snow look like milk, Rosa took a donation box to the van. She came home that night and found an envelope slipped under her door. There was no note at first glance, only a ticket stub from the Riverview Circus, the edge chewed by time. Someone had written one line across the back in a hand she didn't know, "Not finished." She folded the stub twice and set it on the table. Outside, a distant laugh thin and rusty threaded the wind. She turned the apartment light on and off, like a small, unnecessary ritual, and the bulb hummed once in the dark. Then she sat down, and for a long time the house had only the sound of her breathing, and of the radio playing a half-tune she could almost but not quite remember. Lena Marquez had cleaned the makeup trailer 1,000 times. But tonight the air felt heavier, as if the dust itself carried a secret. The traveling circus was settling in for another long winter in a quiet stretch of the Midwest, the kind of town where streetlights flickered and the cold crept into your bones. The performers had already gone to their bunks, their laughter fading into the night. Only the wind outside and the faint scent of grease paint remained. She knelt to sweep beneath the lowest shelf, and her broom snagged on something metallic. When she tugged it free, a small panel in the wall shifted, revealing a hidden cubby. Inside sat an old glass jar, round and heavy, its label worn to a blur. The contents were a deep crimson, darker than any stage paint she'd ever seen. When she pried the lid, a faint metallic smell drifted out like rusted pennies and rain-wet iron. It was unsettling. But the color drew her in, a red so vivid it seemed to move under the trailer's weak light. Curiosity pushed her to test it. She dabbed a bit on a practice mannequin head. The pigment spread easily, smooth as silk, drying to a gloss that caught the overhead bulb like a tiny spotlight. It almost seemed to pulse. She frowned, uneasy. But when she looked away and back, the shine had dulled, leaving only the deep, impossible red. Later, as she walked to her own trailer, she couldn't shake the image of that jar. The circus was full of oddities, half-broken props, and dusty costumes, but something about this paint felt different. Older, alive in a way that made her skin prickle. She slept fitfully, waking from a dream of mirrors lined with crimson fingerprints. The next evening, as the troupe prepared for the show, she showed the jar to Marco, the gentle clown who had been her friend since her first season. He was busy adjusting the giant polka-dot tie around his neck, but he took the jar and tilted it toward the light. "Where'd you find this?" he asked. His usual cheer dimmed. "In a hidden panel," she said. "Ever seen it before?" Marco shook his head slowly. Old circus legend says the founder had a secret formula for the perfect clown red. People joked it was cursed blood of the audience. That kind of nonsense. It's probably just a prop from those days. He smiled, but the corners of his eyes tightened. "Still, maybe don't use it on anyone. It's intense." Lena laughed it off, but during that night's performance, the temptation lingered. One of the newer clowns begged for a bolder look, something to impress the crowd. Against her better judgment, she dipped a brush into the jar and traced thick streaks across his cheeks. Under the stage lights, the red gleamed like wet lacquer, and the audience gasped audibly when he stepped into the ring. After the show, a child tugged at her sleeve near the concession stand. As the girl whispered, the clown was crying blood. Lena knelt, startled, but the child's mother quickly ushered her away, muttering about nightmares. Back in the trailer, Lena studied her own face in the mirror. For a fraction of a second, she saw someone else staring back. A pale woman with a dark bruise under one eye, lips parted in a silent plea. Lena spun around. The room was empty. When she looked again, her own reflection had returned, calm and whole. That night, she couldn't shake the metallic scent that seemed to cling to her clothes. Her thoughts circled the jar until finally she pulled out her phone and took a careful swab of the dried paint from the mannequin. She sealed it in a plastic bag and texted her cousin Aaron, a lab technician she trusted. "Need a quiet DNA check."
Oh.
"Don't ask." "Art research." Days passed. Each evening brought small accidents. A snapped rope, a spotlight flickering out at the wrong moment, animals shying from the ring as if they sensed something unseen. And every morning, faint fingerprints too many to be her own smudged her mirror. Though she cleaned it before bed and locked the door, when Aaron finally called, her voice was tight. "Lena, what is this? It's not paint. It's blood. Mixed with something, but definitely human." In the DNA, she hesitated. It's not just one person. It's many. Dozens. Some match missing persons reports from different states, different decades. The line crackled. "Where did you get this?" Aaron asked. But before Lena could answer, a heavy knock sounded at her trailer door. Startled, she dropped the phone. Victor Crane, the circus ringmaster, stood in the doorway. His usually genial face was shadowed, his eyes dark as the jar itself. "You've been poking around," he said quietly. "That paint isn't yours to test." Lena's throat tightened. "What is it?" "Why is there forget?" "You found it," Victor interrupted. "I don't see anything." "You'll keep using what I give you. Understand?" Before she could respond, every mirror in the trailer fogged as though from a sudden breath. Shapes swirled across the misted glass. Faces pressed forward, dozens of them wide with terror. A single whisper rose from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Tell them our names." Lena stood frozen, her breath shallow as the mirrors slowly cleared. Victor's shadow loomed in the doorway, his eyes unreadable. The voices were gone as quickly as they had come, but the echo of that single plea, "Tell them our names," hung in the air like a threat and a promise. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't want to get involved. You keep quiet and you keep your job. That's the only way you stay safe." He left without waiting for her answer, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the panes. Lena locked it and leaned against the wall, her pulse hammering. She knew then that silence was no longer an option. Whatever this paint was, whatever Victor was hiding, people had died for it. She called Aaron back, whispering what little she could. Aaron's tone sharpened. "You need to leave now. Go to the police." "I can't." Lena said. Not yet. The others, they're scared. And if Victor knows I talked, he might hurt someone before anyone can stop him. The next day, the circus grounds felt different, like a stage set just before a tragedy. Performers moved quietly, their eyes sliding away when she approached. Marco found her near the animal cages and spoke in a low voice. Victor's been watching you, he said. Everyone can feel it. What's going on? Lena hesitated, then told him everything, the blood, the DNA, the faces in the mirror. It is he. Marco's normally warm expression chilled as she spoke. I've heard rumors, he said finally, about people disappearing when the circus comes to town. I thought it was gossip. He glanced around. Victor's been with this troupe for decades. No one questions him. That night, she tried to work as usual, but her hands trembled as she dipped brushes into the jar. The crimson paint seemed to throb with a life of its own, and each brushstroke left faint patterns that almost looked like letters. The mirrors around her shimmered, and for an instant the faces reappeared, clearer this time. A man with a gash across his forehead mouthed the name. Anna. A child with hollow eyes formed the word help. During the show, a sharp pop split the air. Spotlight shattered, scattering glass across the ring. Gasps rippled through the audience as the lead clown's face painted with the red stumbled forward. For a heartbeat, the streaks on his cheeks bled into words visible to everyone. Help us. Then the letters faded, leaving only startled performers in a hush that felt like the moment before a storm. Backstage chaos erupted. Yes. Victor barked orders, his face tight with anger, but the performers exchanged uneasy looks. Fear was turning to suspicion. After the show, Marco found Lena again. We can't stay quiet, he said. The others saw the words. Something's wrong. We need proof. Lena nodded, the decision already made. Victor has a private wagon. If there's evidence, it's there. Just after midnight, they approached the ringmaster's wagon. Marco kept watch while Lena slipped inside. The air smelled of dust and old wood. A false panel in the back gave way to a small hidden room. Inside, she found stacks of yellowed playbills and a box of personal items. Watches, rings, faded photographs, faces of smiling people who would never smile again. Her hand shook as she lifted a leather-bound book. Inside were names and dates, carefully recorded over decades. Some matched the ones Aaron had found in the database. Victims from towns the circus had visited, each name a life taken and preserved in a cruel ledger. A creak behind her made her turn. Victor stood in the doorway, his eyes gleaming like coals. You weren't supposed to see this, he said. The circus is art. Art demands sacrifice. These people live forever, and the show and the paint only choose those the world forgets. You murdered them, Lena whispered. I transformed them, he replied, stepping closer. And now you can help. You have the skill, the touch. The jar chose you. The mirrors on the wall vibrated, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. Faces formed again this time, not pleading but fierce. A sudden wind whipped through the wagon, though no window was open. The glass shattered outward, shards hovering in the air like frozen raindrops. Victor stopped mid-step. The hovering shards reflected dozens of spectral faces, each one glaring. A crimson mist seeped from the broken jar, curling around him. His skin paled as if the blood were being drawn from his body. He gasped, reaching for the jar, but the paint poured over his hands like liquid fire. No, he shouted, but the voices of the dead rose, a chorus of accusation. The red engulfed him, and with a final choked breath, he collapsed. The jar settled to the floor, intact again, its surface gleaming as though nothing had happened. Marco rushed in, staring at the lifeless ringmaster, and the shards still humming with faint light. What? What did we just see? The truth, Lena said, her voice trembling. By dawn, the police had arrived, called by Aaron after Lena's urgent message. They collected the jar and the ledger. DNA tests would tie Victor to countless cold cases spanning decades. The authorities asked questions Lena couldn't fully answer about the faces, the voices, but they had the evidence they needed. The circus disbanded, performers scattering to new lives. Lena tried to move on, but the memory lingered. Weeks later, alone in her apartment, she wiped steam from her bathroom mirror after a shower and froze. Faint crimson fingerprints bloomed across the glass, one by one, forming 3 words. Don't forget us. The air grew cold despite the heat of the water. Lena touched the mirror and whispered, I won't. The prints faded. But the metallic scent of the paint lingered in the room. A reminder that the dead were not entirely Ghanaian, that some art can never be washed away. They brought the mirror home because Claire said the attic had to be cleared. It was the sort of bargain you waved at when money was thin. An ornate oval wrapped in yellowed paper, its gilt frame nicked and tarnished, the glass slightly wavy as if it had been born in another century. It fit under a throw rug until Claire found a place on Maya's bedroom wall, low enough for a child to reach and high enough to catch the morning light. The house smelled of coffee and old cardboard when they carried the box inside. Mark lifted the mirror with practiced, careful hands. He had a way of making heavy things seem simple. Noah, half awake from a night shift at the garage, lounged in the doorway with a cup of something that steamed in his palms. Maya danced between them, designing an imaginary show in which invisible clowns applauded every cartwheel. For a few minutes the family existed like any other, small, noisy. A little threadbare around the edges and whole enough for a Saturday morning. Claire tightened a screw and sat back on her heels. Perfect for the reading corner, she said, smiling at Maya. It'll make bedtime stories feel magical. That night, after Maya was tucked in and the house had settled into its soft suburban rhythm dishwasher humming. Radio low, Claire walked past the hallway mirror to check the kitchen light. She blinked because the glass had caught something that wasn't. Tea there when she dehung it. The pale curve of a painted smile at the edge of her reflection. She stopped and held her breath, expecting her eye to trick her and the street lamp to wink. But when she turned, the mirror showed only her own face, tired and flushed, the line of her jaw familiar and dull. Too many late nights, she told the empty hallway, and went to bed with a small, uneasy warmth at the base of her skull. The next morning, she didn't say anything. She watched Mark load their truck for a fence job, watched the way he tied rope, and adjusted the straps, how his hands moved as if to hide something he'd rather not touch. He kissed her cheek quick and hurried, as if distracted by a phone call that had not come. At noon, Noah disappeared into the garage and did not answer his mother's calls. He came back at dusk with a grease streak on his cheek and the sort of bland silence young men gather when they carry a secret. Maya clung to Claire's skirt and asked where Noah had been. Claire offered him lasagna and a look that asked him to eat and pretend. That night, Claire brushed her teeth and caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The painted smile was there again, not behind her head but layered over her, as if someone else stood so close that their grin reflected in the same surface. She laughed once, a small, brittle sound, and went downstairs. Noah was at the dining table, elbows on the scuffed wood, hands folded. He looked up when she set his plate down. His eyes were shadows. I have to tell you something, he said, and the sentence was simple enough to be devastating. Claire sat, flattened with a sudden physical cold. Noah's voice was not the practiced, childish mutter she had scolded in the past. It came out hollow, as if he were watching someone else speak. I drove, he said. I was the one in the car that hit him. We panicked. We moved the car. Us? His words frayed at the edges. We didn't call them. For a moment, Claire could not breathe. A map of days and excuses skittered across her mind. The missing license plate. The neighbor who'd been drunk that night. The way Mark had been, up in the middle of a storm with a shovel. She felt the room tilt. Noah, she said, low. Noah, you. He kept talking, his voice flat, recounting the night in a drag of images he insisted were not his memory. The thud. The light on the road, a boy's name that sounded suddenly like a bell struck. Maya sat on the rug, small and wide-eyed, and the little girl's face made Claire's throat close even tighter. Mark came in then, wiping his hands on a rag. He had that look men get when they are not sure which role to take protector. Danir Jajandi chose the one that had always felt the least dangerous. Deflection, Noah, stop. Sit down. You're upset. His voice shook on the last word, though he tried to anchor it in normalcy. No, Noah said. I have to tell someone. He deserved. His jaw clenched so hard a vein stood out. It was an accident, but we covered it. I helped move the bike, helped change the plates. The confession spilled and left a mark on the air as real as any bruise. Claire wanted to silence him, to scrub the words away, but she could not. The house held the sound in its bones. Down the street, someone called for a dog. A siren wailed faint and far. The ordinary noises did not move. The secret sat like a stone in the middle of the floor. Then there was a knock at the front door, 3 sharp, deliberate raps that made all of them start. Before Claire could answer, a voice she did not expect called from the porch. "Mrs. Ellis?" "I'm Officer Dana Reyes. I got a report about noises." Claire opened the door. Officer Reyes stood there with a polite, careful look, hand on the strap of a worn notepad. She glanced into the house, took in Maya in her pajamas, Noah's rigid posture, Mark's hands clenched. The officer moved forward with the soft efficiency of someone who had learned not to read the easy scripts of domestic life. When her eyes passed the hallway mirror, the expression on her face changed, as if she had seen something shift in the glass. Her hand lifted to touch the frame, then dropped. For a breath, she peered into the reflection, and Claire saw, in the mirror, the hint of pale paint at the far edge of Officer Reyes' shoulder. "Everything okay here?" Dana asked, and her voice was steady, but Claire saw the way her jaw tightened for the briefest second. This was an authority who expected answers and did not like it when the world offered riddles instead. Noah's confession hung between them like a live wire. Mark swallowed, and in a voice that sounded not all his own, he murmured name a boy's name Claire recognized from flyers stapled to telephone poles last summer. Outside, a car idled.
House.
The house seemed to inhale. Claire felt something shift in the air like the first cool breath before a storm. The mirror behind Officer Reyes gleamed, and for a sliver of a second, the painted grin widened, as if it had room to grow. A second knock came harder this time, followed by the metallic scrape of footsteps on the porch. The normal, structured world pressed in at the door. Inside, the family sat very still, the clown in the mirror watching the moment as if it were the beginning of an audience. Officer Reyes stayed long enough to take statements, her notebook filling in neat, unreadable lines. She moved with a steadiness that steadied the room. Questions, pauses, another question. The television in the living room muttered an old sitcom while outside the day slid into the gray hush of a late afternoon. Claire answered each question as though it were a math problem voice measured. But when Noah repeated the details of that nighttime's landmarks, the scent of rain on asphalt, her eyes blurred, and she blinked away a wetness she refused to define. "I need to see the garage," Rhea said finally. "What you're saying matches the scene. I have to secure it." Mark's hands were steady as he walked her through, but his shoulders hunched with a pressure that came from digging holes and carrying more than wood. The garage smelled of oil and old rope. In the far corner, under a blanket of tarps, 2 long shapes lay on pallets. Reyes knelt, gloves snapping into place. Beneath the tarp was a bike, rust pitted along the chain, the frame bent in a way that told a quiet story of abrupt force. A jacket, decades old and frayed, had been pushed into a box and forgotten. When the forensic techs worked the scene, they found a shard of plastic, part of a license plate light, and a smear of dried material that yielded a swab, and later a match. DNA from the smear tied to a local database entry, a missing teen file open for nearly a year. The detail Noah had given, the precise place he'd remembered dropping the bicycle, led them to the right spot. The house tilted a degree. Words that had been kept beneath polite smiles rose like air from a drained pool. Reyes watched Mark, then watched the shifts in his jaw, the way he pressed his palms to the workbench. "You were here that night," she said. She didn't accuse, she stated. He met her eyes as if meeting a mirror. Mark's confession came slow, like a man rolling a stone to the top of a small hill. He spoke of an evening he had tried to keep out of the ledger of his life. A boy on the road, a flash of headlights, a scream. He had helped, he said, because he feared what the truth would do to his family's name. He and Noah had panicked. They had moved a wrecked car, shifted a body, and in doing so, they had traded legal consequence for a silence that ate them. He told the time where they'd hidden the license plate, even the patch of mud they'd wiped off their shoes. Details Reyes recorded with a clinical lightness that did not touch the crack in her mouth. Claire sat hollowed, hands folded. Her mind reached out to all the small choices that had led them here: late checks, missed calls, the way she had smoothed over a rumor at school to protect a child she loved. The mirror at the end of the hall caught the afternoon and gave it back with a pale, painted smile in the periphery. For a moment she saw herself layered over another woman, someone who had not loved enough to tell the police when she should have. Guilt was an impossible thing to hide from a glass that refused to look away. Outside, neighbors watched a police cruiser roll into the cul-de-sac. Word spread the way rain does, soft and then intensifying. The town's tidy surface barbecue invites, municipal newsletters scuffed against the hard edge of rumor and fact. Reporter vans idled where children had once slid on summer afternoons. People who had assumed the missing boy had run away now faced the possibility of a different truth altogether. As the house filled with formalities, photographs, careful measurements, the quiet of technicians at work, the mirrors in the Ellis home continued their strange insistence. Officer Reyes, in a private moment, while filling a report by the foyer mirror, saw a pale figure in the reflection behind her shoulder. An impossibly small child, with hollow eyes, mouthing a single terrible name. The effect of it lasted a breath. She tamped down a reflexive shiver and wrote the name in her pad. Professional distance was one thing. Compulsion to follow where the mirror pointed was another. Public consequence followed private confession. A search of the nearby creek turned up fragments, pieces of a taillight, a bit of torn fabric that matched Noah's recollections. The physical evidence, combined with the family's admissions, was enough to reopen the case. Charges were filed, not only for the hit and run, but for obstruction and evidence tampering. The legal system, with its slow gears and bright lights, began to grind. Mark's face, once simply the familiar map of a husband, took on an older geography. Exhaustion, remorse, a hardening that came from years of small and large compromises. He would sit in an empty kitchen for long minutes, staring at the hall mirror until the reflection offered back the painted grin. Claire's hands shook as she packed a bag for Maya, who clutched her stuffed animal so hard its button eyes dented the fabric. The child did not yet understand the full shape of consequence. She only knew that her home had become a place where adults spoke with voices that were not entirely theirs. Not every confession made things better. Some raised new questions, new resentments. Some people in town insisted the family had confessed because the mirror had planted false memories. Others whispered that if mirrors could make the guilty confess, what else could they force? The debate fed itself and stuttered like an engine that might or might not start. Weeks later, when the echoes had thinned to a background hum and legal appointments filled calendars, Claire wiped condensation from Maya's small mirror one evening and froze. In the glass, a parade of faces drifted, some remembered from police photographs, others that seemed older, their edges blurred with time. For a moment, the faces aligned into a single phrase, spelled in the way only the heart can read. Forgiveness, please. Claire pressed her palm to the mirror, as if feeling for warmth. She whispered into the bathroom, not sure whether she spoke to a memory or to a child who would grow up with this day on her bones. "I'm sorry," she said. The glass cooled beneath her hand. The painted grin thinned at the corners, as if settling back into place. Later, upstairs, Maya played with a tiny, compact and old thing with its own miniature mirror and laughed. The way children do when joy is a muscle with no memory of strain. The compact flipped closed, and for a heartbeat a pale clown silhouette was visible on the tiny silver. It vanished before anyone else could see it. In the days that followed, the town filed its complaints and its consolations. Courts would decide guilt and sentence and restitution. But in the Ellis house, and in homes like it, where dusty mirrors reflected lives too complicated to bear, something quieter had begun to happen. The glass would not let a secret rest, kept showing what had been hidden until truth, however late, came to stand in the light.